Hello everybody. This is a video which goes over the reason or which goes over some of the constructor methods that we had talked about in this chapter, which is chapter 4. What I'm trying to do here is show you with an example which we had already talked about the theoretical part in the class lecture, but I wanted to kind of show you with a working example how to write overloaded constructors. So what I have here is a public class salary. Inside this particular class, I have some private data members. Now remember, these are my variables that I have defined inside my class, and they have limited access, so these are all private data members. Now then I have created a constructor, and the reason this is a constructor is because look at the naming pattern of the constructor. Remember, the constructor always have to be the same name as the class. So this constructor does not take any argument, but inside the constructor, which is my block, I have defined some of the values, and I have done it in two different ways, although both of them is doing or accomplishing the same exact thing. So the first one, which I have commented out, I had these values John Doe stored in name. I have a date that I stored in this variable called joining date, which is this variable that comes over here, and then I have years of experience and a default salary. Now the book also shows you that, or tells you that, this is something that is created or it can be created by assigning the values like this, or I can do this thing by using this reference. And in this case, as you can see, the code is much simpler, and you can write the entire thing in just one line which says this, and John Doe of course would be the first variable that I'm storing the value name, and this is my date, this is my joining date, this is my years of experience, and this is my value. Okay, then I create another constructor. Remember, this is my overloaded constructor. Now in this constructor, as you can see, the name salary is exactly the same as your class salary right over here, but now it actually takes in 1, 2, 3, 4 arguments. So now I have another constructor which has a little different signature than the constructor that you had seen over here. Let me bring in the line numbers. So now I have a constructor defined in line number 10 and another constructor defined in line number 23, but the difference is the second one has more arguments in there. And I'm doing the exact same thing, where I am basically taking in the values and putting or assigning the values in my private data variables. Okay, so that's why the name is stored as name, my joining date is stored in joining date, years of experience, and salary. Now in this program I also have some set get methods, but I am really not using any of the set get methods. I have shown you an example before in my other lecture, so I basically copied some of these from my previous program, so I could go ahead and delete those, or I could have commented it out, but let me go ahead and delete them. So now this is my simple salary program. Oops, put this back. So this is my simple salary class with two constructors. So we have a regular constructor and an overloaded constructor, but both of them have different signatures. So now let me show you a test salary that I am using to input those values, input some values and create some objects. So even though I started with an util scanner, I realized that I was not using any of the set get, so I can delete this. So now I have a class called test salary, and this is the one that I also have the main method, and this is where I declared an object called new salary. Of course, this particular object is of type salary, so this came from the class, and the way I do it is by utilizing or using the keyword new. But then I am calling this salary constructor, but look at this one over here. This one does not have any arguments. So of course this one knows to go and select the values that I have stored in this salary constructor right here, which goes from line number 10 to line number 21. Okay, so with this new salary, or with this salary constructor, I know I am going to the first one. Now then I am calling this particular method called show info new salary. Remember, new salary is my object, so I'm calling this show info method, and this is my show info method that I have written in this class. So what does show info do? It's a public static void, which means it does not return anything, and it actually passes a salary object. Okay, and inside I just have some system out print line which prints all the information that I actually retrieve by defining this object with a new keyword. Okay, so remember what I have stored over here. These are my default values: John Doe, this is my joining date, my years of experience, and this is done by two methods. You don't need both of them, they're redundant, so that's why I commented this one out. Now remember my second constructor, I also have some information, or this signature would take in values like a string, another string which is going to be a joining date, years of experience, and salary, and they are being stored with these assignment operators. So if I go back to my test salary, now I am creating another salary, and this one I'm calling it Y salary, and again using the keyword new, but now calling on the constructor salary, but in this case I'm passing 1, 2, 3, 4 arguments. So this one immediately knows to go and use this constructor which goes from 23 to 30. Okay, so that's how I'm showing the use of two overloaded constructor. So let me go back over here, and again, so after I assign the values through this parameter list, I am calling in the show info method and passing in this object which is my salary. Okay, so let's now compile this, and oops, getting a lot of errors, so let me correct those. Okay, so looking at the errors, as I was saying earlier, let's correct these errors. Get join date. Okay. You know what? Something that I did, remember in my salary, I had these methods that I had deleted. Okay, and I'm calling this method. So even though I had said that, you know, I'm not using the methods, I actually forgot about it. I am still using these get methods. Okay, I'm not using the set ones, but I am still using the get methods, and that is what it was complaining about. Look at all these get methods that I'm calling: get name, get join date, get experience. Now I could have commented out these things, but I still needed, actually let me do it the other way, but I still needed the get methods. So I could have done something like this, and comment out every single set methods, but I still need the get methods. Okay, so I'm just going to comment out the first one, but I'm going to leave the other ones alone. So let me compile this particular file, which is now the salary file. Remember, this is the salary class, and then come back to the test salary and now compile this file. Okay, so compile the file and everything is looking good. So operation complete. So just to do a recap, initially the error that I saw was due to getting rid of those get methods in my other class, which was my salary class. So now once I put them back in, everything is okay. It's the set methods that we are not using, but I'm still using the get methods for my displaying information. So if I go to my test salary now, this is compiled fine. Let me run this, and what I should be getting once I run this is this information that I have set up in this new object called Y salary, and of course the other one is my new salary, which is another object, but I had set up some default information in my salary class. Okay, so I should be getting two different set of information from two of these objects that I created. Of course, since I am doing an object from a class, I don't have to rewrite every single method. I just have to call in one method and it should do it for me. So let's run it. And okay, so now after I ran it, this is what I got. It says your object information is as follows. Remember, this is the one that should have come from this new salary. Okay, and this is the one that should have come, which is the next one, should have also come from this object right over here, which I created with new. Now you see there is a problem, right? Now it is not giving the right information. Now this is where you need to go back and look at the explicit definition of the this reference. What is happening here is, since I have the same variables defined here, it is masking the information from this constructor over here. So I could fix this by two ways. I could come back and change every single identifiers to something different. You see how I have defined a private string name, and then I'm also defining a string name, and then I'm setting this name equal to this name. So this is where the compiler is getting a little confused. So I can come back and just say something like nm, okay, and then change this thing to in m. Let's say I do this one and change it to JDate, and I'm going to change this thing to JDate, and this one to YExperience. So then it's going to be YExperience, and then let's say this one to salary, sal. And now let's go back and compile this. So let me go ahead and save this, go back to my test salary, again compile it, and now run my test salary. Now let's see what happens. Okay, now I'm getting all the correct information because this is coming from my set of default constructor, where my default is John Doe, 827 years of experience, and my salary. And this one right here, now it does not get confused when I'm using different identifiers, and then it gives me all the right information about my name, my joining date, my years of experience, and my salary. So I showed you how, you know, the compiler was getting confused when you define it with the same identifiers. Now, coming back to the this reference, how can I still write the same thing using the same overloaded constructor. This is how I can do it. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another constructor, but I'm going to go back with the same name, and then I'm going to use joining date, and this is going to be my years of experience, and this is going to be my salary. And I'm going to come back over here and do the same thing. I'm going to say name equals name. My joining date is going to be my joining date. My years of experience is going to be years of experience, and my salary is going to be my salary. Okay, now what I basically did was, now I went back, but this time I'm going to do something different. I'm going to use this reference this time. This is what we mean by explicitly defining the variables with the individual object. So now if I call the same thing, or if I call the constructor the same way, it is not going to get confused anymore because I had explicitly defined it as this. So this is why you may sometimes need to use this reference. Okay, so one way is to change all the individual identifiers to something different than your private variables that you defined over here, or you can say this and this and this dot salary. So now I know that even though this is confusing, it gets assigned to the object that gets created out of this salary. Okay, so now let me go to my test salary, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy and paste this, and now let's call this thing X salary, and let's change some of the values over here. So let's say Clint Eastwood, and he was born in 1954, and then of course he has 40 years of experience, and of course he has a lot more money. Okay, so now I define another object, okay, and I'm going to use the show info and then pass in this particular object. So now let's go ahead and compile this. And it did not like something. It said salary is already defined. Oh, okay. What it's complaining about is that you already have something defined over here. Now, this is also a learning example. You cannot, remember we talked about overloaded methods? Now, when we have overloaded constructors, see, I cannot use this because this one is now confused when I pass the information, you know, as in my test salary over here. Now it does not know which one it needs to go to. Does it need to go to this constructor or this constructor? Okay, so I cannot do this because it is the same exact signature. Okay, so I got to change something over here. So let's say I want to change the signature by not taking in the years of experience over here, but actually assigning something like this. This dot YRSEXP equals 40. Okay, so now I have changed the signature a little bit. It is now taking in 3 parameters, and one of them I am just hard coding or defining it inside. So now let's compile this, and now let's go back to our test salary, and now I'm going to take this one out, because remember that's what I was complaining about, that it needs to be, I cannot have an ambiguous situation where I am, and this is an example of also an ambiguous constructor or an ambiguous method, because both of them have the same signature and it gets confused. Okay, so now let's go ahead and compile this, and it should compile fine, and let's go ahead and run it. Now let's see the objects. So now there are 3 objects. The first one is created by the first constructor, which has default John Doe 827 years of experience. The second one is done by the second constructor, which has 4 arguments, and that's why you have my name, this is when I'm born, years of experience 4, and salary 5,500. Of course, this doesn't make sense. If I'm born in 2013, I cannot have 4 years of experience, but you know, I just came up with numbers. And the third one is where I'm using another constructor, okay, but this time I'm using the this method. Remember, that's how it's associating it. So that's why I say Clint Eastwood, this is my oh, this I must have made a mistake over here, 12,121, and he has a lot more salary, and then I have years of experience as 40. Now you are getting something over here which is a little different over here. So what's doing is, remember, we probably have to go back and fix this, because it might take only so much, it can only hold so much, and that's why it is converting into this value. So let me change this, and let's see now if it gives me the correct value. Yes. So by reducing the number over here, I'm now getting the right value. So now I have 3 separate objects. So you actually had seen why sometimes you would need a this, because it might get a little confusing, and by associating with that this reference, you are specifying what to put in there. Okay, so that's one of the things I wanted to show you all. The next thing I wanted to show you is another example where I'm using pretty much the same program, but I kind of wrote it a little differently. So in this case, I have a salary 1, and of course I have one constructor over here which puts some of the values in, and then you have another constructor, and in this case I did go ahead and change the values. I don't have to. I could have again just done name, and I could have just done joining date and years of experience and salary. Okay, and the only thing I had to do was just say this dot name equals name, my joining date equals this joining date, my years of experience is this one, and my salary is this over here. So I just have to go and say this dot and this dot and this dot. All right, so now I have another constructor, overloaded constructor with a different signature, and I'm using the this reference. And the third thing I have is a void message void method called show data, and only thing I'm doing is showing the name, the joining date, and my years of experience and my salary. Let me compile this. So this is my salary 1. So now I'm going to go write another class, and in this one what I'm showing is the composition. Okay, so now look into this example, and again I'm not using the scanner, so I'll get rid of this. So now I wrote another class called finding salary, but look at my variables that I have over here. I have a variable called salary1 and I call it your salary. Okay, so this is an object that I have included. It is not any of the regular primitive data types anymore. So I have an object called your salary, which is of the type salary1. Now I also have a private integer ID. Now I'm calling in, or I'm creating a constructor called finding salary, and in my finding salary I pass all these values. Okay, now my finding salary, of course this is my constructor because it's the same name as the class, and I'm passing in a string, another string called date, another one called experience, another one called wage, and another one called int num. Okay, now this one has 5 arguments. All right, now inside the constructor I am defining another object called your salary. I'm sorry, I'm not defining another object. I'm creating a new object out of the salary1 class that I defined, which I had defined earlier over here as your salary. But look what I'm passing over here. I'm only passing 4 arguments, because remember in my salary1 I actually created this salary1 with only 4 arguments: name, joining date, years of experience, and salary. But in my finding salary, okay, I am creating this constructor with 5 arguments, but inside I am calling in the 4 arguments that I have defined in my constructor, and then I am calling in for that ID, okay, which is my number that I'm inputting. So this constructor takes in 5, however 4 of those things are being used from this particular object or the constructor that I have already defined in salary1. The 5th one is been assigned through this particular constructor. And now I have another method. I called it show, and look what I'm doing over here. Only thing I'm doing is writing a system out print line, and I am now using the your salary. Remember, this is my your salary, which is my object of the type salary1, and of course it takes 4 arguments. So your salary dot show data is going to pull in information from this method that I have defined in this class. Okay, so of course it's going to give me the name, the joining date, the years of experience, and the salary. But then I have another system out print line which just prints the ID, because remember this is my 4 arguments. All right, so now I can compile this one, and again it still doesn't have a main method, so I'm leaving this class. Now I have created another class, and then this is the one that I'm going to test everything. So I have a public class using find salary, and this is where I have the main method, and now I am defining another object which is called finding salary, which is called the your salary, and which is of the type finding salary. Now this is where the composition comes in. You are calling in an object called your salary, and within this object you are calling in another object. Okay, but in this case, remember this one takes in 5 arguments, so 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay, and then this particular object that I created is calling in the show method that is now stored over here. Okay, so now remember the show is calling another method from another class, which is the salary1. So now you're seeing 2 different things in there. Okay, so that's where the composition comes in. So now if I compile this, and run it, you will see the information coming out where I have created this object called your salary, where I have passed in this name called John. This is my method 812003. This is my experience 5. This is my salary, and of course remember the ID is the one that I have added. So your ID is 12. So this is an example of a composition which is of defining a class, but inside it you have defined another class. Okay. Now the book also talks about nesting class. Again, the concept is very similar. So you write a class and you write a class inside that class. Okay. The book gives you a good example of this, and I think you will be able to follow that example. So with these two examples, I hope you understand the concept of overloading, concept of the using, why you need to use the this reference, even though it is explicitly, why do you need to use the this reference explicitly? Because of situations where you run into variables that are defined exactly the same as the class variables, and also you need also you understood the concept of the overloading the constructors and how you can create individual objects by creating or by calling those individual constructors, the overloaded constructors that you have defined in your class. Okay.